As the 1970s closed, the New Zealand Police's Undercover Programme was developing into a sophisticated crime-fighting tool.
We're living as a crim, but in your mind, you're still a cop.
After early success busting brothels and bookies, undercover agents were now targeting drugs and the gangs who peddled them.
He'd arrive round at our place early in the morning with a dessert bowl full of dope and say, "I bought breakfast."
Agents were now so good at infiltrating criminal networks, they were impossible to tell apart from the criminals they were living with.
You've got to do what everybody else is doing to maintain your cover.
Assignments ended in dozens, sometimes hundreds of arrests, winning major battles in the war on drugs and crime. But the work was controversial and taking a very personal toll.
You terminate as an undercover cop and then you go undercover in the police.
So questions were being asked, were the best and brightest agents crossing the line? By the late 1970s, the Undercover Programme had developed a reputation as an exclusive club at the sharp end of policing. You couldn't volunteer for this work. Entry was by invitation only. Young Constable Wayne Houseman, a former Sunday school teacher, was one of the chosen few.
You're not just catching the crims at the bottom. It was made to sound very exciting. You're really infiltrating higher-tiered crims and catching them when they couldn't be caught otherwise.
Prospects like Wayne were taken to intensive seminars before being sent into the field. Seminars held in secret and remote conference venues. Where the earlier agents had been sent under with little or no training, by this time the focus had shifted to preparing them for every aspect of the underworld.
When I was doing my seminar and I could smell cannabis burning, I realised that one of my good friends actually smoked cannabis and had never told me, and they just realised I didn't know, and it made sense why they suddenly found everything funny and why they wanted to eat everything in the house. None of it had meant anything to me before my seminar.
Recruits were closely watched by operators like Detective Wayne Stringer, who competed with each other to hire the agents most suited to their operation.
You take them to a seminar and you turn them into criminals. You have to turn them into criminals. And they've got to be thinking like criminals, acting like criminals.
I didn't smoke cigarettes at the time, and I thought smoking was just sucking into your mouth and blowing it out. So the first night I thought, shit, this is easy. I can handle this stuff, no problem. No, it sounds silly, but it's sort of like James Bond, you know, secret agents. Well, we were secret agents. That's what it was all about.
Recruits were coached by experienced agents, and despite Wayne's James Bond aspirations, they soon spotted his shabby attempt at simulation.
They shotgunned me. Man, you have to inhale from that. Well, I couldn't walk after a while. They had to carry me around.
To Wayne's disappointment, when the operators chose agents for new long-term assignments, nobody wanted him.
They felt that I was a bit straight, and none of the operators were keen to have me as their agent, but they had decided that they would send me to Auckland to do some short-term vice stuff. I felt very, very alone and quite frightened about the whole damn thing. It wasn't agents I was going to be smoking with now, it was going to be people in the big wide world and people I was trying to catch.
In 1979, the body of Mr. Asia mafioso Marty Johnston was found dumped in a flooded quarry in England. The murder investigation led to the arrest of his lieutenant, Terry Clark, and marked the decline of the Mr. Asia cartel. The multinational billion-dollar drug empire dissolved in a trail of violence and greed. The war on drugs simply stepped up to a new level as police realised their new enemy wore a different uniform, one with patched leather jackets. Gangs weren't new. But in the 80s, they experienced a heyday driven by high unemployment, brotherhood, and the lucrative economy of drugs. In Moerewa, north of Auckland, a violent battle between police and the stormtroopers now marked a watershed in the rise of the gangs.
It was by and large a pitched battle between the police and the gang, involving all manner of weaponry on both sides. And at one point, a police officer was, attempted to be thrown into a burning paddy wagon. The police drew some weapons and shot one of the gang members. And in the melee, numerous police and fire staff were injured.
It wasn't the gang's smartest move. Nationwide publicity put the pressure on police to deal with the growing problem.
At that point, New Zealand, looked at the problem of gangs and went, geez, this isn't going to go away. This isn't going to be a sort of a flash in the pan or an overnight phenomenon. We may really have to tackle this head on. And so, the Undercover Programme began to be used specifically against them.
At the forefront of this new initiative was Ash Smith. A cop for 10 years before joining the Undercover Programme, Ash was charged with infiltrating the South Auckland gang scene.
I guess our plan was to be a barman in the pub for a few months, get known by all the locals, and see where it took us. In the evenings, it'd start to fill up, and you had patched Black Power, Stormies, tribesmen, especially on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. There'd been 400 or 500 patch gang members in there, maybe a handful of Pākehā people.
Any newcomer was going to raise the eyebrows of these locals. It wasn't long before Ash's cover was challenged while doing a deal with the stormtroopers down an isolated track.
We get out, we walk down a track towards water, and we get kicked in the legs behind me, so I'm down on my knees, surrounded by these 4 or 5 guys, and they accuse me of being an undercover cop. I get my hair grabbed, head held in position, and a sawn-off shotgun is put in the mouth. You're an undercover cop. And I guess the heart stopped.
You're fucking knock, eh, boy?
I shat myself.
Fucking knock, admit it.
A newcomer to their turf, the stormtroopers now accused Ash Smith of being a cop.
I go back to it, the training was very, very good. And I was told that, hey, they don't know.
Admit it, you're a pig.
And so long as I don't admit to being a cop, I should be okay. They pulled the shotgun out, started laughing. I had no option but to start laughing as well because I was beside myself. It was a laugh out of total fear.
After passing the challenge, Ash hooked up with an agent's best friend. To convince criminals they're on the same team, undercovers look for a running mate.
As soon as you've formed a relationship with a person strong enough that you can manipulate them, you're in.
What you need to do is to pick on a lower level criminal, because the higher level criminals are higher level criminals because they're smarter.
When agents go undercover, it's not just a matter of putting on a disguise. They have to learn a completely fake personal history. They have to live a second life as convincingly as they live their real one. Luckily for Ash, his cover life was very similar to his running mates, and the pair soon formed a tight bond.
Both born in the UK, about 100 k's away from one another, and we both had that same surname. So he made it perfectly obvious that, hey, chances are we were related, and if I was related to him, I was a good bastard. And because he had the association with the gangs, he said, no, we're related, he's okay. I had down pat what virtually every single one of those guys, those 450 guys, drank, and I'd have a bottle for them, or their jug or whatever, ready at the counter when they came in. They would be buying their booze from me, no payment of cash across the till, but it was, a couple of joints. That'd be their payment for the booze. Every now and then the management would do a stock take, and the stock take was so far down compared to what should have been going through the till. So I got the sack. Bugger. So I was able to go onto the other side of the bar, because as far as the patrons were concerned, I'd been in that bar for years.
Ash's dubious bar skills got him a pass card into the local scene. Just what he can do with this access will mean the success or failure of his mission. Unlike many recruits, though, Sean did really understand the life of an undercover. Sean's father was a policeman, an operator, who had managed agents from the family home. Now Sean's first operation was aimed at breaking a stolen property racket in central Auckland. His operator gave him clear guidelines.
Don't put yourself in a situation of danger. If you do get out, as far as the consumption of marijuana or any other drug, if you have to, and you will find that you have to, then fine, but remember what you're there for. You know, if you had wheels, you were reasonably well sought after by those that in the criminal world didn't have any. I'd been buying some stolen gear off some guys, and they rang me up and said, listen, we've got this great heap here, can you meet us on such and such a corner? So they came running out of the shadows with boxes after boxes and filled my van up. We took off with a van load of gear. Well, they were very excited about what they'd got.
Good stuff.
The big long box looked like it had rifles in it. So when they opened it and found it was curtain material, they were a bit gutted, so I got that for $3.
$3.
And then they opened this other big box that they thought had to have stereo gear in it, whatever. Well, it didn't. It had women's sample high heel shoes, but they're all left-footed ones.
We got any pairs, man?
And they were getting a bit despondent this time. So they opened up the next box and got very excited because it was an electric thing.
Come on, somebody will take this. It's good.
Well, what it was actually a cardio machine that was supposed to have been delivered to a hospital. Obviously a very expensive bit of kit. They didn't have a clue what it was, and I got that for $30. They left me at that point in time with about $40 in their pocket, pretty despondent. We managed to get the cardio machine to the local hospital without too much of a problem, so that was a good deed done. Goodness knows where that would have ended up otherwise.
Across town, though, Wayne Houseman's good deeds in the Auckland vice scene were getting a good deal dirtier.
Yeah, there was plenty of drugs, plenty of ladies, plenty of money. I did very well in the vice scene because I think I was so naive. My naivety seemed to help an awful lot. People I mixed with were smoking heroin as well as cannabis, and so I smoked some heroin with them. I put it in my report, and I was told, oh no, we only want to hear about your cannabis smoking, leave the rest of it out. We then progressed to snorting heroin, which is sniffing it up the nose, which is a little bit less wasteful to smoking. And all this, you know, the whole scheme of things from the undercover seminar to my first use of heroin would be 2 months most probably, and as I say, mostly 3 weeks in the scene itself.
Wayne says his superiors turned a blind eye to their rookie agents' escalating drug use. All the time, Wayne's circle of contacts grew. The more heroin he bought, the more successful his operation looked.
At that stage I had about 75 people for heroin offences. Most of them were selling to me because they thought I was their friend more than that they were some big dealer. They were getting it for their own use and selling some on. So yes, they were doing it, but I didn't feel as though I was going to make any big difference in the whole scene.
Wayne's niggling conscience wasn't his only concern. His underworld persona brought him attention from the local police, and Wayne eventually ran into a real hazard, an old colleague. Agents operate under strict instructions never to reveal their cover, especially to a fellow officer.
He just thought I'd left the police and become a crim, so he ended up handcuffing me and kicking the shit out of me. When I ended up in the cells, I was ranting and raving, and I felt I'd let myself down a bit, and I couldn't actually remember everything I was saying. I kept wondering what I'd said. Heard me, what was going to happen. I thought, oh, if they all get talking, they're going to work it out. Sooner or later, something's going to happen. One of these deals, it's not going to be a real deal, and I'm going to be facing, you know, some very upset people. Everything was frightening to me. My life was frightening. Everything frightened me. I just couldn't get my head together at all. From that stage on, I felt very vulnerable in Auckland.
Threats, both real and imagined, persuaded Wayne to keep a loaded shotgun by his side.
If I was in the house by myself, I had that shotgun handy, because I thought I was going to have to use it.
News of this frightened young undercover officer quickly travelled the grapevine to Police Association Secretary Rob Moody.
I tried to get him to come to me. I didn't know who he was. I knew the information was reliable. The man was scared out of his wits. He was frightened.
High on drugs, alone and fearing for his life, Wayne's imaginary world was turning upside down as his operation terminated.
Night before I finished, they put me in a motel somewhere. They started knocking on doors at about 6 o'clock in the morning. They didn't admit that they knew me. I was then paraded in front of them and had to identify them. It was a terrible day. I just didn't enjoy it at all, and that should have been the highlight of my undercover success.
An agent's mission is about befriending criminals. After gaining their target's trust, they will learn his secrets. But on termination day, that trust is betrayed.
I think it's influenced the way I feel about making friends ever since. I don't always feel that I'm a trustworthy friend because of what I did back then, and I don't trust a lot of other people.
Now here is a classic conflict for anybody. At the end of it all, you've got to turn around and finger someone you've got to know quite well. Someone who sees you as a buddy and say, sorry mate, you're nicked. Huge, huge conflict. Because you're actually shopping someone you like.
And of course, once I did finish, I realised I was going to have to stop all my drug use and things like that. It wasn't quite so appealing, so when the opportunity came to be redeployed elsewhere, especially as intelligence, so there'd be no court cases, I took that.
The intel posting was in Napier. Wayne would still gather information undercover and simply pass it on to his superiors. No gathering evidence, arrests or testifying in court. To Wayne, it seemed the best of both worlds. He still had access to the drugs he depended on, but wouldn't have to finger anyone.
Up she comes, yes!
I found the targets they gave me very easy to get into. By that time I was a crim, and I didn't have to pretend. I knew how to talk and what to do and all that. It was just me. Even though there was never going to be any court cases, I still felt as though I was going to be making friends and betraying people, and couldn't do it. In the end, it just got too much, and I saw some people that I knew from Auckland, and I went over and said hi to them.
Hey boys, how's it going? Fuck do you think you're doing here, man?
Knowing the criminals from Auckland would recognise him as a narc, this greeting deliberately broke Wayne's cover. To the displeasure of his bosses, Houseman had effectively quit. His agent days were over.
Fucking narc.
But the job had become a means to a different end. He was out, but still walking a dangerous tightrope. After some months in the Auckland burglary scene, Sean's connections soon extended into gangland.
I had spent some time with the Nomads. I'd been at one of the local pubs with them and decided to trash the pub. And then we thought we'd better hightail out of that, and I was the only one with wheels, and enough to fit them all in. And there was about 8 of them. So put them in the back of the van and off we went. Drove down, we parked up somewhere where we all took stock, what the situation was. They lit up, and it was like Cheech and Chong. Sure enough, a local police car pulled up.
Be cool. Good evening, sir.
A single policeman had a look at my licence and then wanted to have a look in the van. So he opened up the side door, and if you can imagine, this big bellow of cannabis smoke just wafted out. You couldn't see in the van, and as it sort of cleared, he could make out the patch members sitting in the back there in this sort of haze. And then there was kind of this stunned silence on his face, and then he shut the door very quickly and said, yeah, everything seems to be in order, good night, and quickly got in his car and took off again.
Meanwhile, Ash Smith had quickly graduated from barman to trusted gang associate. With his cover now secure, his operator decided that Ash should lend a hand to an agent in Hamilton whose assignment wasn't going so well.
He was trying to get into the mongrel mob, They had confronted him about being an undercover cop, and they had given him a good beating. And as a result of that beating, he said, "No, enough's enough, I'm off," and he went back to his home station.
But the other agent, Greg, had been ordered back into the mongrel mob, and Ash was sent to help him. Ash was told his experience in calming influence would be Greg's ticket to acceptance in the tight-knit gang.
I followed them into the bar, and I could see, it was 100, 120 mongrel mob members. There's a black power patch looking at me, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? I recognised him as being one of the regulars from my St George. So, big hugs and, "Hey bro, how's it all going?" "Yeah." So I went and sat at their table. Greg went down to the far end of the bar. And after three-quarters of an hour, the whole mood of the bar changed. And I looked down the far end and I can see Greg, head high, horizontal, being passed overhead, being punched and kicked as he's going past me. Goes outside, all the bar, all the mobsters sort of go out there and form a big ring round him. I'm standing on the steps sort of watching. I have two mobsters on each side of me, the gang members, and they're standing in a circle and they're just kicking the living crap out of him. I actually sensed that I was going to be next. So I said, "What's going on?" "Oh, he's a narc."
Narc, it's the pudding.
If Greg had yelled out for help from me, or if he called my name, or anything like that, I'm quite positive I would have been next. It felt like absolute shit to kick him, because at the end of the day, he's a cop. But I guess the self-preservation was a very powerful thing, and I knew that I had to do something, so I gave him a kick.
If I was put in that position, I'd be thinking, "Buddy, I either put the boot in or maybe both of us are going to get a kicking. You're getting a hiding anyway, so what does it matter if it's me kicking or someone else kicking? At least maybe I'll pull back a bit." And I'd have got stuck in.
And it finished off with 4 of them grabbing an arm or a leg each, and then head first into the concrete block wall of the side of the bar, head first, bang. And after they did that to him a few times, they just sort of tossed him like a rag in the middle of the car park. And we went basically back inside. He's lying there and he's twitching. And I thought to myself, the guy's going to die. I drove my car around, parked between the bar and him, and just dragged him into the car and just got out of there. Funny thing is, I made contact with him recently, and he says, "Oh, that was supposed to have been you." I says, "What?" And he says, "Well, it was agreed between my operator and Police National Headquarters that we'd get you to come down to Hamilton, and we'd go around the pubs, and I'd finger you as being undercover, and that way it would help me in my operation." When he told me that, I just thought to myself, well, that black power guy in there, he saved my ass. So thank you.
After more than 2 years undercover, Wayne Houseman was trying to rebuild his everyday life. But the perks of an underworld job were hard to give up.
I was redeployed to Christchurch as a uniformed cop. I didn't have access to heroin. It was not near as easy to get hold of, especially as a working cop in that city. So when a friend of mine suggested that it was pretty wasteful snorting it, and suggested that we injected it, I couldn't stand the thought of having a needle stuck in me, but he convinced me that I would enjoy it. And he was right. Yeah, it was by far the best that way. Of course, once we started doing it that way, things just got worse and the drugs just kept taking over and being more and more important in my life.
Coping with the hypocrisy of being both a policeman and an addict was too much for Wayne. This time, he jumped off the tightrope.
I decided that life was getting a bit complicated, and I tried to take my life, but I was admitted to hospital and stomach pump and all the rest of it. Okay, at that stage I thought, well, I really do need some help. I'm not quite sure what the hell was happening here. So I approached my boss, and he took me down to welfare, and I couldn't tell him I had a heroin problem, so I said I had an alcohol and prescription drug problem. You know, what can they do to help me out? And the welfare guy said, well, we can't do anything. So I thought, shit, thank goodness I didn't tell him I was on heroin. But yeah, so they said, oh, I'll just take some leave.
The enforced holiday didn't help much. Wayne and an addict friend headed to Thailand with cash to score enough heroin to last for a very long time.
We didn't sell any of us heroin, it was purely for our own use. But of course, the little circle of us using it grew and grew, so we soon blew what we had brought back. So a few more of us decided we'd get some more heroin.
Wayne sold his house to pay for his share, and his friends returned to Thailand planning to buy heroin with a street value of over $1 million.
I never ever came back to reality. I never thought that if I got caught, I'd be in that much trouble.
Think our knobs will be home this time?
Although Sean had moved from targeting burglars to drug dealers, he still had no doubts about which side of the law he was on.
I remember one particular occasion I had a dealer, one of the worst businessmen that you could ever come across. He'd smoke more than he'd sell, so he'd be constantly getting himself into trouble. People always owe him money and he couldn't remember where he'd been, so I said, listen, I'll follow around with you and keep a log, and it'll be in special code, this book, so only you and I will know what it is, and we'll record who we've sold to,
Off to the Knobster!
what their address was, their phone number, contact in case we need to ring them back later on, their name, and how much they owe you. And he thought that was absolutely brilliant because I could do his books for him, essentially. Well, we did that for quite some time. Of course, the cunning code that I'd recorded him was English because he sadly was illiterate. He couldn't read it anyway, so he thought it was a great code. He was pretty confident because he told his defence counsel that they won't be able to break the code. I've seen it. But of course, when it was produced, and he was gutted to found that the code was actually plain English.
Every undercover agent is taught to focus on their termination day, the day when all the arrests are made and they can return to a normal life. After 8 months undercover, Ash Smith's termination was just weeks away when he was suddenly ordered to report to his operator's house in broad daylight.
I drove around the block a few times to make sure I wasn't being followed and there was no one hanging around or whatever, and quickly raced up his driveway into the garage, and the roller door came down, and then jacket over my head and ran into the house. I go in there and here's the boss, and he says, righto, I've just been appointed as the officer in charge of the CIB in the Southern Division. He said, I don't believe in the program. It's a total waste of manpower, resources, money. Pack your bags and piss off. Yep.
Termination means closure, the light at the end of the tunnel. Agents say the dangers and compromises they face are underpinned by faith that it's all for the greater good, it's worth it. Ash felt like 8 months of his life were a write-off.
The money it cost the New Zealand taxpayer, it was about $500,000, my operation, for no result. The shit that I went through myself, for nothing.
He was ordered to tidy himself up and report for duty. Putting on his uniform again, Ash realised that even his workmates didn't support the undercover program.
The majority of ex-undercovers were treated with total suspicion by everybody else.
Hey, you have been living with the criminals. You might have been tainted with that criminal brush, and you might not be able to get rid of it.
Sent to the Criminal Intelligence Service, Ash's first job was transcribing surveillance tapes of his friend and old undercover colleague, Wayne Houseman.
He had his phone tapped and his house bugged and all that sort of stuff. And after I realised what the hell was going on, I think I did about a day there, and I said, no, you can jam that. He's a mate.
A member of Wayne's group had informed police about the huge shipment of heroin they'd arranged.
Suddenly it was all ruling our life, and there was so much. It was almost a relief to be caught. It just wasn't such a relief to find how much trouble we're in once we were caught.
This was deep trouble. Addicted, disgraced, Wayne copped the full force of the justice system and was publicly humiliated.
So I ended up in the cells, still doing withdrawals from heroin. Pleaded guilty as soon as I got the opportunity. The only thing I had asked from the police, and that was through my lawyer, was that if they could just say that they were aware that I didn't have any drug use before going to undercover. But of course, instead of saying that, they hopped up in court and said, you know, Houseman's the only rotten apple in the whole barrel.
To the disbelief of many of Wayne's friends and family, his sentence was 16 years in prison.
My life was finished. I mean, not only was I not going to be a policeman anymore, which is what all I ever wanted to be prior to doing undercover work, I was going to be in prison.
No ex-cop could expect to do jail time after massive publicity without some serious consequences.
Everyone knew who I was and what I was. Usually before I even arrived at the prison, the guards had made sure that they knew. They put me in circumstances where other inmates had access to me, but I mean, I expected all that. I just didn't expect the guards to perhaps have such a big chip on their shoulder about it all. Mount Eden, the prison officers told them who I was and then tucked me in a room with about 30 of them. But it is too many to get really messy. I don't think anyone got a meal out of it. We knocked all the food over.
But help was at hand. Ex-agent Tony Boucher, now training to be the police's media officer, knew very well the pressures of being undercover and sympathised. Taking up Wayne's cause, Tony organised a talkback radio show to help Houseman's appeal for a lighter sentence.
I was instrumental in getting all the contacts together and getting them all lined up to be available for interview. I think it was a Sunday night program, as I recall. If they'd found out what I had done to assist that program, I would have been in deep trouble. There was a hint out there that I had been involved, but there was no evidence, so I was never really confronted with it.
For the first time, former agents were speaking out about their experience. Among them was one of the programme's longest-serving agents, Patrick O'Brien.
I'd done what I considered to be my duty. I got fucked up in the process. While they may have had the defence of not knowing what they were doing when they worked with us early people, they certainly knew what was going to happen to their later people. I mean, they had a long list of broken agents that pointed to the fact that this type of work was harmful. But they continued, and that annoyed me, to the point that I was brave enough to come out of my hiding and my seclusion and take a stand.
Although he used a false name on radio, Patrick was the first agent to break the undercover code of silence.
I am not here to tell my story. I'm here to draw attention to the fact that this sort of work leaves those who do the work exposed to the possible things that could happen, such as to Mr. Houseman. Because what we're doing is we're sending men out like they did in the First World War, losing lives to gain 5 yards of mud.
The talkback show caused an outcry. Wayne's sentence was halved on appeal to 8 years. In his summary, the judge described Wayne Houseman as a casualty of the system.
My relationships, friendships...
The Houseman affair did not spell the end of the program. Instead, the police sped up changes designed to avoid a repeat of the public debacle.
The police administration decided that there was really a good basis to look carefully about how they're running the program, how to perhaps select the right people, how to keep those people safe, how to minimise risk.
It was about this time that career cop Wendy Heath took a phone call from a colleague that changed her life.
He rang me up one night when I was at home and said, well, I've been approached to go undercover and they want me to take a partner. And I want to know if you'd come. And I was kind of intrigued and it was kind of exciting because it's the sort of, you know, magic area of covert operations and, yep, I thought it'd be interesting.
Wendy's family had no real idea what going undercover actually means, as her younger sister Amanda remembers.
It was very Charlie's Angels, you know, my sister going undercover, and I had that, I guess, you know, 16-year-old view of the world where everything was glamorous. And I knew it was kind of dangerous, but I probably didn't really realise how dangerous it would be.
Because of the Houseman case, prospective agents now attended more than just the usual training seminar. Wendy and her partner started isometric tests.
They gave us a better picture of what to look out for. What are the key warning signs? What are the indicators that might suggest this person's going to be a very robust person, good, strong personality. They'll be able to do this.
One of the questions that will always stick in my mind was, how do you feel about tall women? I don't care about tall women, I don't care about short women, I don't care about medium-sized women. Women are women, what's this about, you know? And after a few more questions like, do you talk to your gun? And would you drink blood? I'm wondering what I'm being tested for.
Observing Wendy at this seminar was operator Wayne Stringer, who formed a firm opinion of her strengths and weaknesses. Because being a good cop and being a good agent require different talents.
Very, very good detective, very accomplished detective, very straight. It wasn't recommended that she be deployed for those reasons. However, a certain number of people had to be deployed, and ignoring that advice, our supervisors deployed her, along with several other people who it was recommended not be deployed as well.
Wendy was sent undercover, a decision that forever changed her life. As a brand new undercover in 1987, Wendy Heath and her partner were sent to the far north to pose as drug dealers.
They did, just up sticks and go. Wendy and her undercover partner and Wendy's dog, Trooper, who also went undercover with them.
And of course, while he was undercover, he was Tripper, so that it sounded a bit more appropriate. So yeah, he had a cover name and he seemed to cope pretty well with it, really.
Even Wendy's family weren't sure the pair would make a convincing couple.
I would never have pictured him as someone Wendy would be with. So for me, at 16, I guess it seemed really odd that they could even think about selling that as a realistic situation.
He's a lovely guy, but he's like a big brother. And of course, we were portraying a de facto couple, but there was never ever that kind of relationship between us.
Wendy's made some crack about there'd be a line down the middle of that bed and, you know, he would cross it at his peril kind of thing.
Operation Arctic took place in Ahipara. Its target was a gang-based cannabis ring. Within days of their arrival in the far north, Wendy had to turn her own preconceptions on their head.
In places like Christchurch and so on, little old ladies cross the street when they see a gang member coming. In Kaitaia, they don't. They walk up and grab the gang member by the ear, give him a slap round the ears and say, "You haven't been to visit your nanny recently. What's wrong with you, boy?" And the gang member stands there and goes, "Yes, auntie." "No, auntie," and does what he's told.
In the late 80s, dope growing was one of Northland's few thriving industries.
Cannabis was a way of supplementing the family income. It put extra meat on the table. It helped buy school uniforms. It was just part of the way that community operates. So you start to think about that and the socio-economic situation these people have found themselves in. And it's very hard then to blame them for doing what they're doing to put extra food in their kids' mouths.
Despite the newly found sympathy for her targets, Wendy was still very aware that she was an outsider. Ahipara is not the place to pretend to smoke a joint.
For example, the local head of the mongrel mob in Ahipara, who was a lovely guy, he'd arrive round at our place early in the morning with a dessert bowl full of dope and say, "I bought breakfast." And we'd be expected to sit there and smoke that bowl of dope. People watch the person with the joint. Now, that's not because they're watching you to see if you're simulating. They're watching to see when you're going to be finished and pass it to me, please. And it means that you can be smoking from dawn till dusk on an average day.
The pressure of maintaining a double life soon affected Wendy's own sense of identity.
Each night when it was time to go to bed, the one thing I always did, because it was the one bit of me I could hold on to, was I'd have a shower, do the whole cleansing the face, the moisturiser and the hand cream and stuff like that. So I went to bed smelling clean and fresh and felt like me. It's not much you can hold on to.
Ash Smith was also desperate to rebuild his own personality after a lengthy stint undercover. Back in uniform, Ash was suffering constant debilitating headaches and feeling the pressure to fit in.
I'd gone for a year with hating the blue uniform, and to put it back on felt good, and to be able to help people again. But I don't know, something obviously happened, and I went to work one early shift, just burst into tears and didn't stop crying for days. Something had happened, something had clicked, something had snapped, and I hated the uniform again. But I was a bit of a mess then, and ended up perfing.
Perfing became a common exit route for undercover officers. The Police Employment Rehabilitation Fund is available to all police officers, granting a pension and early exit from the force on medical grounds. Sean followed Ash and also took early retirement.
I didn't last that long. My levels of cynicism that are already formed before I even joined the police, and then formed during, and my experiences during the undercover program, built on to the point where, you know, I couldn't be bothered anymore. That was it. I'd had my bit. So after 8.5 years, I called it a day.
By now, the force acknowledged that agents were suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. The administration said that changes to agent selection and monitoring of the program would keep casualties to a minimum. But when Wendy resurfaced for a family reunion during her operation, she had familiar problems.
In the whole 9 months that Wendy was undercover, we only saw her once. And I remember being struck by the fact that it was odd that you could sort of take a weekend off from living another life. Yeah, she wasn't the same.
I couldn't relate to the family because it was too different. It was too different. I wasn't the same person I was. I almost felt like it would be better, I'd be better off back up north.
After 9 months, the termination of the operation was timed to coincide with a big dope deal. Wendy and her partner were dealing with dangerous people and now discovered there were nasty rumours running around town.
Hey man, how you going?
The guy we were going to do the buy bust with for £10 came round to see my partner. This chap had the information from telecom sources that the computer lines had gone into the hall, one of the hotels was booked out for some cop operation, and that he figured it was us, and that it was an undercover termination. The guy had really put the hard word on him, and had said that he'd be back later with a shotgun, and that he was convinced we were both narcs, and he'd just do a drive-by and get us both. We had 2 armed detectives in the house with us just in case, which was pretty freaky. Termination day was a very strange day. It's at that point that it really comes home to you what you've done. And what you've done and what the undercover program is about in its simplest form is you go out, you make friends with people, and then you betray them.
In 9 months, Wendy and her partner had bought more than $100,000 worth of cannabis. More than 30 offenders were charged, but they weren't the only casualties in these operations. Some of the agents who'd made the program such a logistical success were now the police's broken soldiers. Smarting at the treatment they'd received, agents like Wendy were breaking cover, forcing the police to confront cracks they say had existed in the program from the start. So the undercover program heads into the 90s in a blaze of unwelcome publicity.
It's a bit like the relationship between the sexual abuser and their victim, the guilty secret. And we're the guilty secret of the New Zealand Police.
Next week on Undercover.
And she'd come right up to me and said, "Oh, Andy, I've got nowhere to sleep tonight."
Certainly something that you only do in the final week of your operation, not the first.
Poor young cops as pea addicts.
He would have gone on to kill other people here, a mission.